Hello, and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or searched desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited for this week's topic. We are talking about how to handle hard conversations in parenting. And oh my goodness, there are so many of them. And I see this so much in the work that I do with families. And I am so excited to have a guest for this episode, who is a therapist, and one of her specialties is supporting people around how to have hard conversations. So, Megan, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad to have you.
Oh, Kim, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. So excited to chat.
Yeah, why don't we start off with just sharing a little bit about yourself and the way that you
Mhm.
practice, and then we'll dive into these hard conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a therapist. I am a trained psychotherapist. I've been working for about 10, a little over 10 years now. For a while, I worked in the hospital setting, supporting patients and families, going through really challenging medical diagnoses. And then when the pandemic hit, I moved into private practice. So I have now had a private practice supporting teens and adults, kind of navigating a whole host of issues, challenges, ranging from anxiety, depression, overwhelm, anything that's feeling challenging to them at the time. Those are the kind of clients that I work with, and that is my practice. And what is interesting about my work is that I'm actually a trained creative arts therapist. So I've been trained kind of in addition to your average, talk therapy session. I always tell my clients, right, our sessions will look like a normal talk therapy session, but I'm going to bring in some other tools, and that might be, some music, breath work. We might bring in some art, just,
I
movement,
love that.
ways to really integrate the material that we're talking about in a like holistic, embodied way. Because everything that we are feeling, experiencing kind of happens to us on a holistic level. So
Yes.
it's just a really powerful, deep way to do the work. And I have found in the past few years, as I finished this kind of a more in-depth psychoanalysis training, which this training actually requires you to really take a look at like all the like deep, vulnerable, kind of scary parts of yourself, all the ones that you might be inclined to avoid,
Mm-hmm.
and have to like look at it, process through it. And that is honestly what kind of led me to this hard conversations niche, because so much of that is having to like, okay, how do I lean into this discomfort of staying with something that feels really scary, maybe hard to say, hard to approach, without running away from it. Because as someone, I will say, who grew up in a family that did not talk about anything, like to an extreme point, I know how that can make your relationships feel really distant and make your relationships feel really challenging and really hard. And so much of what I feel passionate about doing is really helping people to lean in and to be able to face and have these hard conversations that are actually on the other side of it. They're meant to bring you closer and to make you feel more supported and feel more nurtured in all the ways that you need. And so many people stop themselves from getting there because they're just afraid of having it in the first place, which is fair
Yes.
because I used to be one of them, right? Like I would be terrified. I remember as a kid, I was terrified to answer the phone. Like that felt scary to me, just answering the phone at home. So that's a long story short of what I do.
I love that. And I love how you kind of got to this place. And I'm going to highlight two things you didn't mention for my audience, right?
Yeah.
First is that you're a mom.
Yes.
And second is
Yep.
that you do draw on attachment theory in your work. So you are an attachment
Yeah.
based.
Oh,
And I just
totally.
want to highlight those
Mhm.
because I think it's so
Yeah.
important and valuable that you have all this lovely, wonderful knowledge about
Mhm.
tackling these hard conversations and using them as
Yeah.
a vehicle for more connection. But now you've also moved through early parenting. You have a toddler,
Mhm.
and I
Oh
don't
yeah.
think you don't know until you're there as a parent what it's like to suddenly have your
Mhm.
identity turned upside down and you're sleep deprived.
Yep.
And if you're the parent that gave birth, you have all the postpartum hormones affecting you, and
Mhm.
your body's changing and your relationships are changing. And then all of a sudden, you have to sometimes face big, hard, scary conversations with your partner, with your extended support system. And that's like not ideal
Yeah.
conditions for hard conversations, right?
I know.
It's
Oh
so
my God.
tough.
Yep. It's so, so tough. And it was, it was surprising to me. My son is he's 16 months old now. So he was born in November of 2022. And at the time I thought like, my husband and I it's gonna be great. We have great communication. We've really worked through a lot of our kinks in communication that we've struggled with over the years. And I'm like, we're gonna be great. And boy, man, in the postpartum stage, it was almost like surprising to me how hard it was
Mm.
because being the birthing parent, breastfeeding, we have always operated on like an equal partnership, right? Like we each give the same, and we just a time and time again always had to come back to the same conclusion that this can't be. It's just impossible for it to be equal,
Yes.
which
Yeah.
is so hard when it came to feeding and sleep and just especially even throughout the course, right? Our son, me being more home with him, um, you know, most often that, him coming to me before, going to dad and it has brought up a whole host of communication things. I remember when it was happening saying like, wow, this actually brings any communication stuff you've ever had with a partner, it just gets like so amplified when
Yes.
you're in the postpartum period.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for folks that have really intense, highly sensitive sleepers, that period of acute struggle is so elongated compared to like your kind of
Mm-hmm.
average sleeping baby or your really well sleeping baby. And
Mm-hmm.
it can really wear on people.
Totally.
And if you didn't have great communication skills before you were a parent, then it's going to be even harder because you don't even have that foundation of some
Right.
knowledge,
Some
trust that
pieces to work off
you
of.
know how to handle difficult
Right.
things.
Yeah.
I feel like some parents talk about what they think are going to be the hard topics while they're pregnant or before they start,
Mm-hmm.
trying to have a baby,
Mm-hmm.
and others don't even realize what those conversations could be.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the people who thought they talked about it and thought they were in agreement until the reality of a baby is here. And
Yeah.
suddenly they feel really differently than they thought they would feel
Mm-hmm.
about topics. And
Mm-hmm.
I see this a lot around bed sharing and sleep training
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
independence and responding and like even around parent preference, like you were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
or some of the
Mm-hmm.
family
Right.
involvement. Like these are some of the hot topics that I see a lot of my
Yeah.
clients really struggle with.
For
Um,
sure. Yeah, which is it's so hard when there is, right, two differing opinions. And because what tends to happen, right, whatever the disagreement is or the opinion that isn't shared, what is so hard is that everyone enters that conversation with the hope that the other person is going to be able to hear them and validate what they want. And then when
mhm.
you're at a disagreement, it's really hard to ever get to that point because you're saying, this is what I think, and I know this because of this. And they're saying, but I want this because of this. And there's no, oftentimes, I think what I see so many of my clients and couples kind of come into is that they're not able to take that pause and say like, okay, I'm hearing you, I'm hearing that this is what you're wanting and why. I
Mhm.
hear it, right? Like to have to validate first. I always say that, validate first. I hear it, and then use the word and, never use the word but, because but is
Yes.
super invalidating. So say the word and I just need you to hear too that this is what I'm feeling and this is what I'm needing. And then, having the other person do the same, right? Validating, okay, I'm hearing that. And then getting to a place of being like, okay, now how do we compromise? And
Mhm.
that's the part that's really hard because it does require everyone to give in a little bit, right? For there not to be like a right and a wrong, a good guy, a bad guy, which people fall into that all the time. right? Like it's
Yeah.
either I'm right, you're wrong. So it's really hard to like let two competing things like both be true and both be present.
Yeah. Okay. I have like three things I want to chat about based off of what you said right there.
Yeah.
So hopefully I'll hold them all in my head
Yeah.
to get there. So first is, how would you suggest parents enter a conversation like that? What should they keep in mind besides validating, which is like probably one of the most important things that we can
Mhm.
do, right? Because validating doesn't mean you agree with
Yeah.
someone.
Yeah.
Like when if their partner tends to get defensive when they bring it up, or how can we minimize
Yeah.
a partner getting defensive? Because it's really easy to get defensive when you're already feeling
Uh-huh.
vulnerable
Oh,
and insecure, which is
for sure.
hello, early parenting, right? Like so
Oh,
much.
yes, totally. Right. And I first want to say I'm a therapist. I specialize in this and I've gotten defensive in
Of
these
course.
moments. So just wanna,
We all
normalize
do
this
sometimes.
so much. Of course. Right. And so what I would say is that if your partner is getting defensive first, like I want you to just validate the response that you're having, right? Because likely if someone's getting defensive with you, you're probably gonna get right, you're gonna get activated, you're going to maybe get angry, you're gonna maybe get defensive in return. You're gonna be very
Mhm.
frustrated. So first we want to validate that those feelings are really valid. I think the really hard part and the part that takes a lot of mindfulness is to like kind of zoom out for a minute and have the awareness that like, okay, they are being defensive because they are feeling really strongly about this. And perhaps they might be, usually when there's defensiveness, right, someone's very much not feeling heard. Maybe they're afraid. There's something they're afraid of. They're worried about something. So like being able to like go underneath the defensiveness to like tune into what emotion is there. And so, but that requires you to have to feel through your frustration to be like, okay,
Mhm.
I'm feeling this, and have to like find some compassion for your partner and finding compassion for where they are and why they're feeling the way they are. And
Mhm.
ideally, then you can have the same in return, right? Then you can have space to say, it was really hard in that moment. I was feeling really frustrated because when you became defensive, I felt not heard. I felt abandoned in that moment. It really takes a lot of slowing down and really just like teasing apart what is happening communication wise.
I love that. Way back in the day, I took the Gottman Institute's Bringing Baby Home
Mm-hmm.
educator certification. And I remember, because conflict
Mm-hmm.
was part of that, the idea of like softened startup and how we bring ideas
Yeah.
up to our
Mm-hmm.
partner. Do you see a lot of that in your work? Like kind of how we bring up a topic
Yeah,
making a difference?
totally. Yeah. That's such an important point. I always say, like, never try and process big topics when you're both heated. Never
Mm-hmm.
going to work, right? Because you're both activated and you're going to be in like self-preservation mode. So it's not a time where you're going to be soft and leaning in and being able to work together. So definitely having like scheduling a time of like, hey, I would love to talk to you about this. Do you think we can set aside time to do that tomorrow at this time? Like actually planning a time, I think is really important because then it gives you both time to mentally prepare, maybe to think through what you want to say, what's important to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're both going to be more intentionally entering that conversation from a place of we want to be connected. We want to hear one another. We want to work through this.
Mm-hmm.
And then also those pieces I think are really important to say at the beginning, right? Like, what is our intention for this conversation? Is our intention to come out of this with a compromise for whatever, right? A compromise when it comes to how we're negotiating sleep, right? When it comes to how we are splitting house responsibilities. Like how is our goal to be on the same page here? Because the more that you can agree to that in the beginning, again, the more likely you are set up for a more successful, connected conversation as you go
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, because then you're working together and it's like, okay,
Mhm.
we need to understand each other first.
Yeah.
And then we need to figure out, okay, what are the moving pieces here and how can we try to meet
Mhm.
everyone's needs? And
Yeah, absolutely.
I see clients a
Yeah.
lot assuming, right? And that creating a lot of issues. Like, I'm
Mhm.
assuming why my
Yeah.
partner wants to do this instead of asking them, like, hey, why is this so important to you?
Yeah.
Like, maybe that's not the best
Yeah.
phrasing. Maybe you have better phrasing, but you know what I
No,
mean? Like,
actually, I was going to say that's a great way to phrase it. Why is this seems really important to you? Tell me more. Right?
yeah. Because sometimes it's like it's
Mhm.
actually in protection of their partner, right? So like I see this a lot with sleep.
Mhm.
Like one parent really wants to sleep train, the other parent doesn't, and that's of course why they're coming to
Mhm.
me. And
Mhm.
we kind of dig into why does the other parent want to sleep train? And it's because they're worried about their partner and how they're
Yeah.
coping, right? And they don't feel like
Yes.
they have other
Right.
tools or other avenues. And so when we can uncover that, then we can, oh, that's a problem we can solve, right? Like that's
Yeah.
something we can dig into in other ways,
Totally.
you know?
Yeah. I think you highlight such a beautiful part is that, yeah, there's usually underneath it all, there's always a fear. There's
Mm-hmm.
something someone's afraid of. And the more that you can get to that and name it and bring it out loud, I think again, like the second, I'm sure that with that couple, they said, I'm worried about you.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that that probably immediately brought them more together because
Mm-hmm.
that is such an important piece. It's not, I want my way to be the right way. It's actually, I want to take care of you and I want to support you.
Yeah,
And this is how
absolutely.
I'm seeing maybe that could happen.
Yeah. And then it opens doors to more solutions also when we can
Mm-hmm.
kind of get beneath
Totally.
just the simple top level stuff.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What would you suggest when, how would you think through when a couple is trying to talk about something that is getting them really activated, like they're really getting triggered with the
Mm-hmm.
conversation because they didn't have enough
Yeah.
sleep or the baby keeps interrupting them or we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about
Yeah.
someone's overstepping mother-in-law like drama
Yep.
or something that just
Mm-hmm.
really is hitting a nerve and
Yeah.
we need to pause a conversation. Like how do we kind of
Yeah.
navigate that when you're too triggered to really have that conversation right then?
Totally. I think it's knowing that when you're too triggered, right? Like talking
Yes.
beforehand, before we're at that point, like when that happens, maybe we say, like, sometimes with, whether it's family, sometimes siblings or couples, we'll say, have a code word. Like, even if you can like get to that point, you're like, popcorn, right? Like we are at our triggered point. That means we take some space.
I love
We
that.
take a breath, and again, I know it's hard, like, because it's right, the words are usually funny, so it either works really well to kind of break the tension, or it could probably be a little more frustrating, but it's so necessary to take that space to cool down our nervous systems so then we can think a bit more logically from our logic brain rather than our emotion brain, and be able to return to meet one another. And it requires too that, like, sometimes I will, tell my husband or both of us, like, one of us just needs to be the one to say it. And sometimes you're always waiting
Mhm.
for the other person to be the one to take the lead on something, or take the lead on this conversation, take the lead on us calming things down. But I think if you have an agreement that, like, whoever kind of notices it first, like, ooh, we're getting heated, we're not productive right now, we need to take space, just committing that whoever notices it first is going to be the one to say, hey, either the code word, or let's take a minute and then come back. Because I think just the cooling down is such an important part.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I've heard of a code word being used when you see your partner being triggered in parenting also to kind of help them realize like maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's time for a
Yeah.
parent switch, right?
Yeah.
Like
Parent switch. Uh-huh.
let me tap you
Totally.
out
Yeah.
and take
Yeah.
over and give you a breather. And
Break.
I
Yeah.
think when you preface with like that's not a criticism that you're doing a bad job, it's just, ooh, I see that you're
Yeah.
getting
You
dysregulated.
need. Totally. So
Yeah.
important. And I'm thinking of the dynamic too that I see with so many clients and couples, that plays out in my own relationship, is that, and again, we are generalizing here. This can play out in many different ways in many different relationships.
Of
But
course.
I think oftentimes we have more of an overfunctioning, if we're talking about a heterosexual relationship here, an overfunctioning mom, and who is type A, will kind of do all the things, right? Will see an issue and go do it.
Uh-huh.
Will take on anything, right, she's seeing. And then you have a dad who's there and present, but may not take the lead in the same way. Like he might be waiting to be told kind of, this is what you need, or this is what you do, when
Mhm.
often, again, I'm speaking for myself, so often I'm kind of secretly wishing and hoping, like, can you just do it, right? Can you just know that, like, I've been up with him since 6 a.m. and I need you to come in now and, like, take some time so I can take a
Yeah.
break. And one of the things that I preach, and I know it's the biggest thing that I need to hear, is, like, I need to say that, like, I need to feel okay saying, hey, I need you to step in now and I need to go out, because as someone who's more of a people pleaser, right? I'm always underneath the surface, like, also taking care of my husband, right? Of, like, being like, I know
Mm-hmm.
you worked really hard this week, so I want you to be able to rest, and I want to do this for my son, So all these things are happening under the surface, and it's so funny because like my husband is such an external processor. Like he is not like thinking like nothing, more deeply happening that he's thinking and wondering about. He's just like if he's thinking it, he'll say it, and so it always blows his mind when I'm like I tell him that all of this is happening for me under the surface. He's like, "Wow, that that is not how it works for me, and I just need you to say it. I need you to say it out loud." And so that's the biggest thing that I have to do, to say it out loud and then to not feel guilty. Like if I say, "Hey, I need a
Yes.
break," because the hardest thing is like, then when I go take the break, it's really hard for me to be present to myself in the break because I'm already like I'm like hearing him cry or I'm hearing something happening
Mm-hmm.
and feeling like, oh, I need to go. I need to go help. I need to help. I need to do this. So that's, I think, a big challenge that I think many couples face, that dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I see it all the time. And asking for help
Mm-hmm.
can feel like a really hard conversation, right? It doesn't always have to
Oh,
be these
yeah.
big things like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, whatever, big,
Like your
like
mom
parenting
can't come
decisions.
over or,
Yeah.
yeah, stuff like
Or we're
that.
not going to
Mm-hmm.
leave our kid overnight at your parents' house,
Right.
or like
Mm-hmm.
big
Yeah.
parenting, philosophical decisions. It can be
Yeah.
like, I need you to step in, right? I need
Mm-hmm.
help. I need a break. I
Yeah.
need to talk about how we're dividing up parenting
Mm-hmm.
responsibilities or household responsibilities
Yeah.
just because you need help. Like any of those at any level can feel
Mm-hmm.
really, ooh,
Yeah.
like light
Really hard.
confrontation, when it shouldn't
Yeah.
be. It should be just saying
Right.
your needs.
Yeah. That's normal. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So here's a trickier thing, and I see this a lot
Mm-hmm.
also, right? And of course, we're generalizing and all the things, but
Yeah.
one thing that I see, and particularly this is around when couples don't agree about how to handle sleep, right? Meaning
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
one parent wants to do cried out and the other parent
Mm-hmm.
does not want to sleep train at all. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's much harder to find a compromise when we're that far
Oh,
apart,
yeah.
right? And what I also
Totally.
see a lot is to be, again, very gender here because it does seem to happen more in heterosexual relationships. And
Mhm.
this is a generalization. So, of course, I've gotten the opposite of this sometimes, but
Yeah.
usually
Totally.
mom is doing all the research on
Mm-hmm.
development, on attachment, on sleep training, on safe bed sharing, on why sleep training might not be the best
Mm-hmm.
choice and why she doesn't agree with it and what other alternatives there
Yeah.
are and all the things. And then her
Mm-hmm.
partner comes in and just says, all my coworkers are doing cried out. It works really well for them. We should be doing that. And doesn't want to go deeper.
Oh.
And
Yeah.
I find this to be really hard for everybody
Yeah.
because there's such a
Totally.
different balance of work and
Mm-hmm.
also inaccuracy of information and
Mm-hmm.
expectations. Yeah, obviously we want the dad in this scenario, right, to feel like he's able to contribute to decision making, but obviously like
Mm-hmm.
there isn't a compromise on cried out. Like there's other compromises that we
Yeah.
can make. And I try to help families with
Right.
this, but like, how would you
Yeah.
suggest kind of even approaching that conversation in a way that's actually productive as opposed to just like butting heads
Yeah.
and trigger?
I'm sure that the impulse for in this exact scenario for the mom to be like, but you didn't do all this research, right? You didn't read this. I read this. I did this. I did that. And the more that we can, again, right, come from that lens of validating of like, hey, I hear that that's right. That's what your coworkers' experiences are. I totally hear that. And I'm wondering if I can share with you a bit more about what I have researched and why this feels important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's a key component. I need you to know why this feels important to me.
I love
And
that.
then, for the partner too, for the partner to be able to say, I hear that that's important to you, and this is what I'm afraid of, right? I'm afraid I
Mm-hmm.
right. It goes back to that. I'm sure, like I want us to feel sane again and to get sleep, and I want us to do that. This is all really hard, and I want it to do it in a way that feels maybe easier. And then for the other parent to maybe say, I hear that, and we need to. I want us to be on the same page about doing it in a way where that feels right to both of us. So again, right, it's this validate and I want to
Yeah.
work together here and making space for everybody's feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. I really do. And I think it's tricky, right? Of course, when a partner doesn't want to look at information. And I think then that kind of
Yeah.
becomes a deeper almost a deeper
Mhm.
problem that's not maybe where we need to go today. But, in the
Totally.
sense
Yeah.
that if you won't look at information for the sake of something that's important to your partner, then we need to do some deeper
Yeah.
relationship
That's
work,
another, yeah,
right? Like that's a
totally.
whole
Yep.
different um
Absolutely. Hmm.
conversation, because if it is important, then you should at least look like, hey, here's why our child shouldn't be sleeping from 7 to 7, because
Right.
it's, look at all this
Hmm.
information showing it's not how he's supposed to sleep at this age, or something, right? And then
Yeah.
we can
Right.
go, okay, where do we go from here that is honoring the values of attachment, but also
Exactly. Yeah.
how do we get you guys to
Hmm.
have more time to spend together, right? It doesn't have to be
Yep.
through the vehicle that you
Right.
think it is that you're disagreeing over.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know,
So important. Yeah. Great
I
point.
love that. I love that. So
Mhm.
I feel like, and you mentioned it in the beginning, right, that these conversations can bring people closer together on the other side. And I just
Mhm.
wanted
Yeah.
you to talk a little bit more about that. I know that's not a really
Yeah.
guided question there, but
No, no,
just
it's true.
share a little bit more
Yeah.
about.
Well, I think, and I'm going to bring the attachment, piece into this because I think so much of what plays out in our adult relationships is totally rooted in our childhood attachments and our childhood
Mhm.
attachment styles. And I'm going to be, speaking probably more from like an experience of kind of older childhood, but it definitely roots back to infancy. But if you grew up in a house where, you weren't given the opportunity to like share your thoughts, your opinions, your needs, maybe you know maybe you grew up where a parent was a bit more reactive,
Mhm.
and so therefore you learned to like, I'm going to be quiet, I'm going to do everything right, I'm going to make sure that I don't rock the boat so that I'm not on the receiving end of the more reactive parent.
Mhm.
Or maybe you grew up in a home with a parent who really needed you and you kind of had to take care of them in certain ways or kind of monitor and make sure they were okay. So again, right, you are learning that I don't get to be my full authentic self because I have to be attuned to what my parent needs. And
Mhm.
every child, their goal is to stay connected to their parent. So that is why we all learn to cope and adapt in the way that makes us feel most connected to our parent. And so when that happens in our adult relationships, you know, for someone who's more of a people pleaser, right? That's the kind of brand where you learned that I'm going to be kind of taking care of everyone, and I'm not going to rock the boat. I don't have needs.
Mhm.
I don't need to have needs. Don't worry about me. I'm good over here. And then, it's learning how to kind of undo some of that conditioning that we all have, right? It doesn't matter how you grew up. We all have certain types of conditioning that we learned in terms of relating. We learned that some things were okay to say, some things were not.
Mhm.
And so those things play out. And, you're going to get really frustrated when your need isn't getting met in the same way that happened when you were younger, when it's not getting met in your adult relationship. And so that is what usually causes all the friction. And underneath every argument, like this is why therapists will say, like, when couples are fighting about the dishes, it's not about the dishes, right? It's about the needs that are happening underneath and
Mhm.
that aren't necessarily feeling heard and understood and met. And so the more that we can just kind of get under the surface, it's all about getting under the surface and like make space for each other's feelings of what's really happening and let it be okay. Because I think so many people get stuck in, in the dynamic of, if you feel this, then this means this about me. Like if you're feeling upset, then this means that I'm a bad partner. I'm this.
Mhm.
And the more that we can like start to like understand the discomfort that we feel maybe in our partner having certain emotions, because we're so used to like everything needs to be okay, right? They can't be mad, they can't be upset. So I need to adapt, right? You have to like kind of let that go a bit, because when you adapt, you're not letting your feelings be present too. And so it's a lot of just really learning, how do we communicate in a way where we can hold space for each other's feelings, validate it, and then just really get to the what's the need, right? What's the need that we're each having? Because it's okay, right? Like we're all human. We can have different thoughts and feelings and
Mhm.
opinions, and it doesn't mean that we are good or bad. And so when it comes to the hard conversations, when we can get to that type of dynamic, then we are going to feel, right? We're going to feel more seen in the way that we weren't seen when we were younger. We're going to feel more validated. And when we're able to feel like held and accepted authentically, no matter how we feel, that is where we will create, right, those most close connected relationships. And so much of that is, it's not in the absence of conflict, because conflict is inevitable. It's really, how do we repair, right? How do we talk about it afterwards to really understand what happens, understand what we were feeling, understanding what each person needed, and how do we work together to move forward.
I love that. Oh my goodness, I love that. It's so true
Mhm.
because connection is all about being seen and understood.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
eh, disagreeing can really be a teaching, reconnecting,
Mhm.
understanding moment
Yeah.
if we're doing it with respect and being aware, like you were saying earlier, of our triggers and
Mhm.
pausing and slowing down and being more mindful and checking in with
Yeah.
ourselves and each other. Um,
Mhm.
and I feel like especially in the first year of parenting, probably like there's so many times where you have so many things that are going to make you more easily triggered,
Oh yeah. Oh
just
yeah.
newness and exhaustion and navigating so many
Mm.
changes, and the way that you relate as a couple is so different
Yeah,
um
totally.
after you have
Mhm.
a child, and
Yeah.
just when you can prioritize those pieces, even if you're really messy at it at first,
Yeah.
just having like
Right.
these are important things, just having this kind of
Yeah.
framework and these ideas can be so important as you
Right. Yeah.
start kind of course correcting a bit your
Mhm.
communication around
Totally.
um,
Yeah.
these things.
And this the thought of grief is coming to me because so much of, like, you're kind of grieving like the relationship, especially first time parents. As a first
Mhm.
time parent, you're grieving like the way your relationship was,
Mhm.
because now, right, where your relationship was the priority beforehand, now, right, your child is the priority. And so there's like this grief and frustration of, probably for both parties, around
Mhm.
the fact that your relationship as an entity has kind of, has to take the back seat a bit. And of course we right, want to come up with, strategies and ways to ensure that that isn't really the case, but it's a part of it. Like, you're
Yeah,
grieving the past version of your singular self, but also the past version of your relationship, and having to adjust. And so there's so many layers that you're adjusting to, even outside of your new infant.
absolutely. And I feel like the couples that I see doing the best or thriving the best, I
Hmm.
don't,
Yeah.
whatever, you know what I mean?
Adjusting well. Yeah.
Yeah. Are the ones that are able to more easily accept that what connecting
Mhm.
looks like, what setting aside time to talk looks like, what taking care of themselves looks like with a baby or a young toddler isn't what it looked like before their
Yeah.
baby and isn't what it's always going to look
Mhm.
like, right? That this
Right.
really is a season.
Right.
And if our best date night we can manage is got the baby down and we're gonna sit, and have a glass of wine or a cup of tea and
Yeah.
chat over a
Yeah.
podcast or, whatever. Like, and
Right.
that's versus always being able to go out to dinner or brunch dates versus
Mhm.
dinner dates or,
Yep.
what any number of ways that you adapt to
Yeah.
where you're at, I feel like really helps. And when we stay
Yeah.
connected in the small things, I think that also is so helpful when we start stepping into
Yeah.
territory that's a little bit more friction, a little bit more
Hmm.
tense, right?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. That's so true. Such a great
Yeah.
point.
And I see with my clients a lot. Sometimes they know something is a tricky, a hard conversation, and sometimes they really get caught off guard, like they thought they were on the same
Mm-hmm.
page. And I remember that, not with my partner, but with my friends when I had my oldest, assuming that because we thought similarly on so many things that we would think similarly about parenting, and then being like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
we don't.
Oh.
Some of these people we don't agree at all, like at
Yeah.
all about how to handle pretty big things. And that was like, ooh.
Hmm.
That was really different,
Yeah.
that getting caught
Yeah.
off guard.
Right. And that is quite an adjustment of figuring out, okay, in that being caught off guard, is there something that is it going to affect our dynamic, right? There are
Mhm.
different approach to parenting, or is it something that, okay, that's not necessarily entering our relationship, so maybe I can validate where they're at, but doesn't mean I have to agree,
That
that
it is
using
not.
that kind of assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, that's harder when it's your partner. And of course, it does affect the dynamic, right? Versus a friend that you're just like, okay, we don't have to talk about sleep. If you are like obsessed with sleep training and we're kind of butting heads on it, we can just set that topic aside and just be friends a lot of times.
For sure.
Of course, your partner, you got to find some road.
Different story.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of work there.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, because I feel like we could talk forever on this, but
I know.
Thinking back over your last 16 months of parenting and with the work that you do, what do you feel like the number one tip is that you would give couples as they kind of tackle some of these hard conversations? I know I've touched a lot on them, but just kind of like one thing to mull over.
I think so much of it is like doing your very best to find compassion for yourself and compassion for your partner. And like just starting out with like the shared, like, this is so hard. This is really hard. We're both having a hard time. And the more that you can like come to anything, right? When you're exhausted, you haven't slept, you're overwhelmed, there's dirty dishes, there's, everything's a mess. The more that you can come to it with, okay, this is really hard. This is really overwhelming. What do we need? How can we support one another today? I think, and then making space then to say, okay, this is how I would feel supported today. And this is how I would feel supported today. Like coming to it with that and having that be your priority, I think will be really good. I know at least for me and for my husband was very helpful in the moments. Like we had to have that agreement of like, when this happens again, right? When we both get like triggered and upset again, it just means that we're both needing something. And can we have compassion for that? So I feel like compassion is key in so many ways.
That reminds me of my very favorite parenting mantra. And I may have mentioned it on the podcast before, but I forget which parenting coach I got it from. If it was, I don't remember, but they're not giving me a hard time. They're having a hard time.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
That was my life in 2020.
Oh gosh,
many times parenting over the years have I come back to that to find that empathy and compassion that they are not giving me a hard time. They are having a hard time. And it's so true even with your partner, right? Because it's
right. It applies to both for sure. Yeah. And to ourselves too.
Absolutely. We're all doing the best that we can. Right.
Yeah.
And that can be hard to remember sometimes when you're feeling really like, oh, but coming back to that can be so helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, Megan, thank you for all of this. I am absolutely, like I said, could really keep this conversation going forever. Where can folks find your work? I know with therapy, some of it's more local, but I also know that you have and are branching into some things that are less local.
Right. Totally. So I see clients I'm licensed in the states of New York and Rhode Island. So my Instagram and website is connectwithmegan.com or connectwithmegan.com, Instagram handle connectwithmegan. You can find me there. I am about to release a group program specifically tailored to women who are looking to improve their confidence and their trust in themselves and their ability to have hard conversations, to navigate some of these things that feel really hard and scary. And I'm really excited to do that in a really supportive group format. And, that will be launching, I believe, in April. So stay tuned. I will be sharing more information about that.
So exciting. I think that's going to be such an amazing program, honestly.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's been awesome talking to you, and I have loved this conversation today.
Yes, me too. I'll have to come back so we can continue into all the other topics I know we could touch on.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, so many.
Yes.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.